This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, I am joined by Garrett Godsey. He is the author of The Riverner, a novel, and it is about this kid whose also name is Kid. He is a survivor of the American foster system and is a courier for an underground syndicate called the White Lotus. And of course, is a lovely love interest named Alice. And it's new fiction. It's super exciting. This has an already pretty high rating on Amazon and Goodreads as well, so do with that information as you will, but it sounds like a great book, and we've got the author right here and now to talk about it. So welcome, Garrett, to the Cameron Journal Podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Excellent. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your book and what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, well, I mean, you kind of gave the quickie of it. It's a hero's journey, a tale that's been told many times. But in this case, the hero is an underdog kid that grew up in the foster system. He lives on the street in San Francisco, and he's a courier for this shady syndicate called the White Lotus. And one day on one of his jobs, it goes terribly wrong, basically. And he, from that point, has to run for his survival. And in doing so, he stumbles upon the existence of this other universe, essentially, that's called the Dream. And the Dream is a real place that's created from the collective consciousness of humanity. And it's been around as long as people have been dreaming of anything. And like most interesting and powerful things, people over the eons have taken advantage of it one way or another, use it to gain power. Some are good, some are bad, most are bad. And he ends up having to, fight these people, not only for the survival of his friends, which is what initially gets him into the fray. He goes in there to help his friend out. But eventually it becomes a situation of the survival of the world. And along the way, his path intersects with this girl called Alice, who is what's called a traveler by the people that are in the know. And travelers are people that have grown up being aware of the dream and being trained to travel into it and out of it and use it to gain power. So she's kind of on the bad side, and she kind of comes over to the good side, and you never kind of know exactly where she's at. So she's a little bit of a dark pixie dream girl, which is a popular trope and one of my favorites. I don't want to spoil it, so that's pretty much the gist of it.
How did you decide to write this? This is a whole fascinating world.
So I would say there's kind of three primary seeds that led to me eventually writing this book. One of them is that I was a delinquent growing up. I didn't have to live on the street in San Francisco, but I definitely was in and out of homes and various systems of justice growing up. So that planted some definite stories in my mind, and just kind of an awareness of people that are in that world. Luckily, I got away from it when I was younger. I got my act together in my early 20s and ended up teaching myself how to design apps. So I designed biotechnology apps. So I've always been fascinated by the human mind and psychology and Jungian principles and things. So the idea that, our dreams have power over us and we have power over our dreams is fascinating. And then the other piece of it, and this was a bit in my delinquent phase. I I don't know if we could talk about this on the podcast, but there's a medicine or a drug called ayahuasca, and it is used by people to essentially go on spirit journeys. You could say it makes you trip and hallucinate, but it takes you so far beyond a trip that it's a pretty wild experience. And in doing so, I definitely had the sensation that there are worlds beyond these, and that kind of stuck with me. And then lastly, the third C was I was living in San Francisco for about 10 years. I live in Prague now, but I lived in San Francisco for a decade. And I was down in the Haight District, which is a pretty common haunt for a lot of the street kids around there. And I just kind of got a wild hair one day and decided to go buy a case of beer and take it to the park and hung out with them for a while. I had my journal with me, and I just asked them their stories and how they ended up there. And a lot of them were there on purpose for one reason or another. A lot of them had been juggled around the foster system and various other systems and were there. Everybody kind of had a story. And one thing one kid told me that stuck with me was that they prefer to be called travelers. And I thought that was cool. And that definitely made its way into the book. The people that go into and out of the dream on purpose, they're called travelers.
Well, that's that's quite fascinating. How's your process? Are you a pantser? Are you an outliner? How did you get your story put together?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I suppose. I like writing intuitively when I am in the mood for it, basically. And then pretty much when I have what people would call writer's block, that's when I sort of fall back onto various tools so that I can continue progress forward, whether it's exploration via doing like character back sheets or getting out a pack of index cards and mapping out some plot lines and stuff like that. Because occasionally if you're pantsing, you can get stuck, especially if you've got a pretty complex plot, which is the case with the Riverner. A lot of different characters and moving parts. So there were a number of places where I didn't get stuck, but I was afraid of painting myself into a corner. So in those spots, I explored some different things via index cards. Typically, I like a lot, and figured out where it would probably be best to take it. And then at that point, I had kind of a guidepost in the distance, and then I could pants it again towards that guidepost. But I didn't know the end of the book until probably the 85% point. And even then it was sort of vague. So
Very nice. That's quite fascinating. Is it the first in a series?
yes, potentially. So it's my first book. And I did a lot of world building for it. So there's definitely a whole world that exists in my head, and I know there's a potential for a whole world. So I could certainly write more books. And this one in particular, being that it's my first book and it was a ton of work to do, because I basically had to teach myself how to write while writing it. It took like 4 years. So after that, I knew I'd be tired, basically tired of writing, maybe tired of the characters. So this particular book, sorry, long answer. I wrote it so that it could stand alone, but that it also feels very much like it could continue. So that if I don't write another one, it'll be fine. People won't be angry. But if I do, people won't be surprised at all, and it'll track.
No,
Highly
that's
likely in a
very
series.
good.
It's the question of if the next book I write is immediately a sequel or if it's something else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it looks like you've already gotten a lot of great reviews and a great response. So it seems like a follow-up is most essential.
Yeah, that's what people are saying. Like, when's the next one coming out? I'm like, oh my gosh. I've heard that from other authors that this took me 5 years to write, and they read it in a weekend and they're ready for the next one. So yeah, that's good though. I'm happy to hear that. And
I know,
like
what
I
a
said,
problem to
I'm sure.
have.
Yeah, yeah, for real. I think the big question that I've been juggling around is whether or not it'll be like sequential or rather like a proper trilogy kind of a thing, or if it'll be more of a things happening in this world, a la, like Dresden Files or something like that. We'll have to see. I have a lot of exploration to do. I have a wall covered in post-its and ideas, so we'll see where it goes.
Well, it's also something where you may decide to take a greater portion of your number two book and to go back in time and then be back in the present for number two and then straight into the future with number three. So
Yeah.
doesn't mean it always, you can structure it so many different ways.
Yeah. So hopefully it'll be
Yeah.
a surprise for people because it'll be a surprise for me too.
Yeah, where did you get the name from?
So the name came up. I don't remember exactly when the word came up. So I have a tendency. I have a lot of things I do when I get stuck, basically, to kind of kick me back and onto track. And one of the things that I do is I'll explore words. So I'll take a word that is meaningful to me for the situation, and I'll look up a synonym, and then I'll look up the etymology of that word and figure out the roots of it, yada yada yada. And typically that'll sort of build out this mind map, and it tends to kind of get my gears turning. Well, at one of these points that I was doing that, the word that came up was riven, which is to split apart violently. I thought that was pretty cool. And again, I don't want to spoil the story, but there certainly is things being split apart violently in the case of this story. And I added the ER at the end, so it's a bit of a made up word, Riverner, one who splits things apart violently.
Yes, that I'm always impressed when people come up with clever names and things like that because my books are very boringly named. Um, what about
Yeah,
the
hopefully
the cover?
sometimes things are too clever, and you're like, I don't get it.
Yeah, what about the cover? Did you pick that out?
Yeah, so that's the base drawing is an ink drawing by a guy named Pedro Correa from Brazil, and then after he did the ink drawing, I took that and then I designed the rest of the cover around it. So I did like the typography and the color work and the rest of the artwork other than the original black ink drawing. And the ink drawing is of a falcon, a peregrine falcon, which is a bird that is commonly found in San Francisco. Typically, they're in the wild, they roost on cliffs, but they thrive in urban settings because the cornices of buildings make great nests for them. And Kid, this isn't too much of a spoiler because this is like chapter 3 in the book. Kid lives on a roof. He managed to find himself sort of a lost boy's little small tiny home on top of a roof in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, and his flatmates, you could say, are a couple peregrine falcons.
That's that's quite impressive. In terms of who inspires you, what do you read? What do you like to read?
Lots of stuff. I mean, I definitely lean towards science fiction and fantasy, but I love supernatural thrillers. Um, Not a big surprise. This is true for many people, but Stephen King is probably the author whose books I've read the most. I also love Philip K. Dick. I love Dune, of course, like all the greatest hits of sci-fi. I'm a big fan of. I'm also very much inspired by other media too, though, because I'm a '90s kid. I grew up on video games and Saturday morning cartoons and anime. So, movies like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, FLCL, all those cool '90s animes. What's the plural of anime? Anyway, and then also RPGs. I love story-based video games. So I think there's probably some DNA of that in the Rivener too. So Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger, like all the retro video games.
Yeah, it reminds me of this one game called Shadow Walker or something. It very reminiscent of that. It was also a tabletop game as well. It was later adapted to a computer game, and it has that kind of vibe to it, which I think is really cool. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's a good call. That's a big inspiration as well, is tabletop gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, Forgotten Realms, Magic the Gathering. That's kind of a tabletop game.
yeah.
Comic books, graphic novels. Like I, as a kid, I just absorbed all of it. I loved
You are 10,000% more nerdy than you seem. Are you aware of that?
it. Yeah, I've been told all the
For
time.
the audio listener who's not watching this on YouTube, he is neatly dressed in shades of brown. There's a mid-century modern lamp. There's a ukulele leaning against a wall. Everything is white, very neat, very clean, very efficient. The books are all ordered on his bookshelf. My bookshelf is chaos because I that's what I have ADHD and autism, a lot going on here. Your life is like pure, like honestly, like we can just put that in veranda, like click magazine. This could be your lifestyle, folks. This could be your lifestyle. Um, so you don't seem nerdy at all. How did that happen?
I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe, like I said, I grew up kind of on the wrong side of the tracks, so there's a certain element of, I don't know,
I
nerd
know that's
skill.
the other thing that like that's not you like that's more like B&E, drink a beer, like ride dirt bikes sort of thing, not like let me bust out my Magic the Gathering cards. You're just such this interesting juxtaposition of people. I love it. I'm all about it.
Conundrum.
Yeah. No, that's what makes it so perfect. So, what do you think is the hardest thing about writing?
Continuing, keeping going. It's very much an exercise in endurance, both emotionally and physically. Especially if it's, well, I don't know, because I've only written one book, but I would imagine that the first one might be one of the hardest, just because you don't know if you can do it. And especially if it's a big book, the Riverner is like 500-ish pages, depending on the printing. And it took me years. So there were many times where I wasn't sure I could finish it, but I had the ability to finish it. So I mean, I suppose that's what
No, my
stops most
first
people.
nonfiction book was a compilation of essays from the Cameron Journal that took all told 3 years to write. My first novel was a story I heard when I was 19 years old. I published it in January of 2020. It took 13 years to write.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
production has sped up. My next book is already done. So we're up to a 2 year lead time now. So that's good.
That's good. Yeah. I'm hoping I can knock
Yeah.
the next one out. That's the plan. I tell myself it took me twice as long than it should have, because like I said, I had to teach myself how to write while I was writing. So I'm hoping I can cut the time well in half. So I'm shooting for a year for the next one.
Yes, no, I mean, for me, I went self-publishing, so I was teaching myself how to do layout and how to do
Oh,
cover and all this type of thing. So I had to, I was doing InDesign, I was looking at specifications, I was calling friends, like it was a whole thing. So
it's a whole,
the second one
a
was
whole,
easy because I was like, oh, I know what to do this time.
yeah. Well, I
So
don't know about you, but after this, I was like, man, I might as well start a little indie publishing imprint, because all the stuff I had to learn that has nothing to do with writing a book, I could just give this to people if I could find
No,
cool
very
stuff.
truly, I no, very truly, I just did that. So my first three books I published myself at Widgery Omni Media. I am very privileged to have recently signed a deal with something other publishing, and I have offloaded all of that onto them. Um, so which is nice
Yeah.
because I also work there as a consultant, but I have offloaded all that onto them. So that's very handy. So
Yeah,
um
if I were offered a good deal, I would probably take it because of that. Because I would rather just focus on the writing. Now that I've learned all that stuff, I wanted to learn it all so I would understand what exactly I was giving away for a significant portion of royalties. I wanted to know what I was selling. Because I didn't even try to get a traditional publisher. I didn't even query it or anything.
yeah.
I wanted to do it
No,
because I wanted to do it
I
with my
did
friend.
I didn't query my nonfiction because I didn't have the platform. I could do it now because I have a bigger platform. Um, so I didn't even do that. I knew that was gonna have to be a self-published job. My first novel I sent out to two different agencies. I got manuscript requests within 24 hours, which is a good
Mhm.
sign. I was frightened for about 4 hours. I was going to have a bidding war, and I did not know what I was going to do about that. I called my dad, and I'm like, "What if they both say yes? What do I do then?" He's like, "If that happens, call me back and we'll talk." I'm like, "Okay." And they both said no, and I was just kind of like, "Well, I have the infrastructure. Screw it." So I just blasted forward, and I did my own cover. I shot it myself, photoshopped it myself. It scares people, which is good because the book is kind of scary. So a mission accomplished. So yeah, no, that was really great. We should have a conversation about your publishing plans at an off-air location. Because we may be able to do great things for you. But yeah, it is a whole process, and it is a whole journey to bring this to life and to fruition and to make it happen. And but I mean, how good was that feeling when you held your book in your hand for the first time?
Pretty good, honestly. It was maybe this isn't good for publication because it kind of messes up the story, I suppose. But honestly, I was just uh, relieved. I was like, finally, there we go.
Yeah.
It's out there. Now I can do the next thing because like I have so many ideas for other things that I want to write, and I was like, I can't start anything because I know if I start something else, I'm not going to finish this. So I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing for years, and so finally it was done. I was like, there we go. Oh God. And then beyond that, it was definitely, I think the most exciting part actually was everybody else, like I just wanted to write a book. I didn't know if it was going to be any good or not. But then, my friends and colleagues, and then random people on the internet, people on Bookstagram. Bookstagram has been great. I spent about a year building up an audience on there, and very kind and empathetic community, and but they're also honest, and especially if you ask them to be honest, like they won't hold their punches, and yeah, people digging it, and then digging things about it that I kind of passed over. I mean, I wrote it, but like it wasn't a big deal to me, but then it was a big deal to them, and so then realizing that you put something out in the world that is different for every person, that was pretty powerful. And I think if anything keeps me writing, that's probably one of the things that it'll be.
No, I always say that with everything that I do. I get very tired of it. And then I get a great comment, or someone says it really helped them, or they learned something from the news hour, whatever have you. And it keeps me going because sometimes I falter, I get tired, all this type of thing. And I'm just kind of like, why do I do this? This makes no sense. That was me this morning. Why do I do this? This makes no sense. And
And many times,
and
why am I doing this to myself?
yeah, yes, but it really is. It's the people that keeps me going. 100%. It is really true.
Yeah,
So
that, and then the other thing that keeps me doing it is I just love it. Like um, growing up, my main creative outlet was visual arts. I liked to paint and draw and like fill sketchbooks with ideas for characters for video games and stuff like that. And I could lose myself for hours doing that, listening to music, and pick my head up and it's like 4 in the morning. I'm like, oh God, I need to go to sleep. I have school tomorrow. And then for some reason, it may have been the delinquency thing, but like I lost track of the visual arts. Really, it didn't really scratch that itch for me anymore. I could do it still. I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't get lost in it. And then when I started writing, I found that again, and it was exhilarating to be able to just completely lose track of time for hours and hours. It's like the flow state. I don't know if you've heard much about that in various. I mean, it's for everyone. It doesn't really matter what you do, whether it's business or sports or writing or painting or anything really. Like you reach this flow state where your brain sort of disconnects from time and you just do the thing. And it's half reflex, it's half intuition, and then drawing on whatever muscle memory and knowledge you might have.
yeah, I know I have read oftentimes about it. That very rarely happens to me. I have ADHD and autism, and they're always at war. So I very rarely get to just kind of go along. There's too much going on.
Yeah.
I have to, in order for that to happen, I really have to balance the stimuli. It's like I have to have enough stimuli to be okay, but not so much as not get distracted. So it's always this constant balancing act. So it's very difficult for me to get into that. But sometimes it it really is a matter of it doesn't happen until it's late at night and the world is quiet and the phone doesn't ring and the emails aren't coming in. And then there's be like a couple hours between like 2 and 4 a.m. and I will do 3,000 words in an hour and a half. Um, sort of
So
thing. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I did that the other night and finished a portion of something I was working on, and it was so nice because it is so hard to make that happen. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
it's hard these days. There's so many distractions. I mean, even if a person, is not on the spectrum or having any ADD, combating their, attempts to have attention to something, even without that, good Lord, I leave my
yeah,
phone in a different room. I put it on silent. I turn my Wi-Fi off on my laptop. And that's the reason I like having a clean space, so it doesn't distract me, because I'll be distracted by by a mess. So I have to everything clean, and then put on some music, usually like some kind of something that doesn't have vocals. I love music soundtracks or movie soundtracks and video game soundtracks, like beta wave playlists and stuff like that. The book actually has a link, like a QR code in the beginning, in like kind of like the forward section, that links to the Spotify playlist that I listened to pretty much nonstop while I was writing the book. A lot of people would think that was cool. It makes sort of a nice background music to reading it if you're into that.
yeah, it's a very immersive experience. I like that. That's really cool. That's really cool. So, all right, well, you're just delightful, and I'm just so envious of you. I want your outfit. I want your apartment. I just get just all of it. I just want all of it. So, why don't you tell us where we can find you online and how to stay in touch with you?
Yeah, best one is going to be Instagram, or the part of Instagram for bookish people, Bookstagram. It's Garrett Godsey Books. It's my handle. And the Garrett has two R's and two T's. And then my website, same thing, garrettgodseybooks.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Yeah, thanks. And by the way, I'm not on anything else. I don't have Twitter. I mean, I have it, but I don't use it. And then Goodreads and Amazon, of course. And then if anybody's interested in the book, it's pretty easy to find. There's just one, Riverner by Garrett Godsey, if you search on Amazon for it.
Excellent. That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.